I have one topic that I would love to talk about with you, because the one thing I stumble across again and again with your work is that you kind of focusing on human design, and you're focusing on, and I don't fully understand what another sort of energy reading, birth chart reading. Can you say just a few words about that second chart reading so I kind of understand that a little more personally?
The second chart reading is that it's actually not a chart. It's actually what I was first trained in before human design, and it has to do with reading your soul record in the Akashic records. So what your soul is about, and it's more of an intuitive, it's a logical intuitive system that I was trained in to actually get specific information about the qualities of your soul, and the origins of your soul group and those types of things within a specific framework that add to my understanding of how you're here to operate as a human being in this life.
And wonderful, like, thank you for explaining that, because this brings me to the actual question I have, which is, so the human design kind of says, if I know where you're born, when you're born, I know your human design. And these other systems say, hey, if I look at your soul records, I will get an understanding of what you're here for, how you're built, how you're made up. Those are my words. Those are probably not accurate at all. And I'm really curious about that, because on one level, I have the sense of, yeah, okay. And on another level, I'm like, really? Do these readings really say something about me or another person? And how does that work?
Interesting question, because that's kind of like when I get into that logical framework of, you can't prove any of this, right? I start to ask those same questions. But what I've discovered by just working with different clients is, and this is okay. Let me set the framework here, or let me set the foundation here. We're talking about frameworks of perception. So my framework of perception around this unknowable, unseeable thing about your soul record is a framework that I work with. It might not be your framework, it might not be someone else's, but when I work with that framework and I'm very specific about the questions that I ask, and the process or the ritual I go through to connect, it seems to bring out truths for people that resonate with them. And that's how I can get my logical mind and my linear mind to play along with this more intuitive, unseen framework. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
In one step it did. So when you're reading the soul records, it's you don't get a piece of paper where it's like, oh, this is the soul record, but you get information on a different layer, frequency, in a different way. And this information, whatever you get, seems to resonate with people, or it seems true to them, whatever that means. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
it seems true to them. And back when I was only doing that work, it didn't, for me, it wasn't grounded enough. It wasn't satisfying enough. And, it would seem true to them. It would seem like, oh, yes, this is what I really feel is my divine mission or my divine purpose, or however they see that or work with that. But then the question was, well, how do I actually live that in my life? And then when the human design piece came in, it's like the macro of the infinity of the soul, and the potentials that the soul, or the gifts that the soul, or let's say the soul signature has. I could see how that gets filtered down into this other framework of, here are the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of how your body and mind work together, the themes that you are bringing through from maybe a soul level, from definitely your physical level and your mental level and emotional level, and how and then I get that sense of how those two energy frameworks work together, so I understand more of the bigger picture of who a person is and what their potentials are.
And I can follow you. I also have like sensations, pictures when I hear you talk. And I'm still in this question of like, what does that actually mean? So when you were talking about the soul that's being filtered, that maybe describe like when you connect to somebody's soul, how do you experience that?
Well, the first level of connection is actually the research in the records. And this goes back to my training of really having a specific set of questions that I'm actually dowsing to get answers from. And then I don't know how to actually explain how I know the rest of it, because I start to get a feeling about what that energy is like. And then when I sort of connect in those ethereal realms of, I don't even know how to explain that to you, but when I'm doing the recording of a reading in that way, I connect with that person's energy, and things just come to me like, oh, well, this is in their human design chart, and this is what their soul origins are about. And these are the prominent characteristics of their soul gifts. And I see how that's lived out through the mechanics of their design, or how it can be lived out. And then I'll hear things, I'll have images, I'll have just sort of abstract kinds of knowings that then I attempt to give voice to.
And when you say you connect on an ethereal realm,
I think
how
you're freezing up a little. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Let's just give it a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're saying you're connecting on an ethereal realm, how do you experience, or how do you know you're connected?
That is such a good question. I'm trying to feel, I think I feel it in my body. And, and in my framework, I'm working with so-called guides or representatives, or, and I don't 100% buy that, because I feel like we are all of it. But in terms of my human mind, I have to kind of separate it out. And a lot of times what it almost seems like is that these guides, when I'm doing the research and when I'm connecting, are actually telling me certain things or showing me certain things that have some kind of a physical resonance in my body, so that I know that or feel that I'm connected and on track and tracking with that person.
And these guides, you kind of made this gesture. Is it that you see them, feel them, hear them? How are you aware of these guides?
I think I'm feeling them. I don't, other than like when I close my eyes, I see images and I get visuals like that, but I don't see, like, as some people claim to see, like actual beings, but I feel different vibrational signatures around me or moving through me. And that's kind of how I do that portion of my work, is I will connect up and then invite in that energy signature, that stream of consciousness that would be their higher self, or what we would recognize as like their broader knowing, any other energies and frequency signatures that are there to kind of guide the process come in, and then I open myself to translate that frequency or that flow of energy through me.
So you're connecting with that vibration, and you are trying to kind of give voice, form, expression to that vibration, to that information that's coming in.
Yes, and when it comes, like and I know it's not, a lot of times it's definitely some sort of form of energy signature. It's something that's bigger than me. It's something that if I had a broader range of a broader vocal range, I could probably voice it even more. But a lot of times, you know, when I connect in, there's just this strong energy that has a frequency and a vibration that is undeniable. And and then I work to give voice to that, or to at least explain what I'm I'm sensing.
So I'm very curious about that. If you had more vocal range, you could even give more voice to that. So I imagine if you were in a big room full of like instruments, you could find the instrument or the tone or the note that resonates with that vibration.
Probably so. I hadn't thought about that, but probably so. And there's usually some kind of a message or a knowing or an image or something that's kind of begging to come through to be known to the person who is receiving it.
And when you connect to that vibration, how do you open to it? How do you, is there anything you do within yourself, within your body, within your emotional system to invite that vibration?
Well, I have a whole ritual that I well, and it starts with I do this ritual, and it starts with meditation, and there are certain times when I can't connect in. So the way that I do that kind of work is that it's not done on demand. I just intend to get it done within 3 or 4 days of the time that the person asks for it. And I wait until I really feel grounded and centered, and then I move through this entire ritual where I really ground myself into the earth, and into the solar system, and out into the universe, and then use this visualization to sort of open up their records. And that's what keeps me in this space where I'm grounded, where I'm clear, and where I feel open to the information and the frequencies that are coming into me or coming toward me.
So now when you say records, I imagine that might be like kind of like the collection of frequencies that a person is carrying. Is that how you experience it?
It could be, yes, it could be. I'm referring specifically in my framework to the Akashic records. So it's the frequencies of everybody's frequencies, the history of everything that has ever been thought and potentially will be thought and experienced and all of that. So it's kind of like the library of the history of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, this feels like this is quite round, at least for me right now. It's like I have a much better sense for what this means and how you experience it, because I'm always again curious about how people actually experience these things. Like what what do they mean by guides? Because I think different people mean such different things when they use these same words. So thank you very much for just sharing that with me.
Thank you for asking.
So that was 15 minutes.
Wow.
That went quick, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did.
And like from my side, we can either take a short just moment to breathe. And I'm also curious, like, how is it for you right now? How is it for you to look at this through my questions? Because I imagine I ask different questions than you ask yourself.
Well, I really enjoyed the exercise of explaining it to you as someone who's curious, who doesn't it doesn't understand my framework, and it really helped me to work out some things for myself, because I actually do ask some of those similar questions, because it occurs to me from time to time that people take for granted that, guides and, energies and, everybody's talking about the same thing, but we really aren't.
Yeah. So the floor is yours now. And I'm really curious, is there something that you are thinking about that's kind of at the edge of your own thinking, exploring, that you would like to talk about? And I would like to listen.
Okay, so my questions that I kind of ruminate on a lot of times have to do with how do the pieces of my my work and my life fit together. That's kind of the outer edge. Like, I have these things that are close to me, like what we discussed, and my human design work and all of that. And then I have other things that are close to me, like my orchard and what I'm emerging into, that that I don't really, I see like when I look at my work online and I look at all of this work that we talked about, that it seems like that's one thing. And then like my orchard and my explorations with growing things and gardening, that's a whole other thing. And I'm sensing and feeling that those two pieces belong together. And my inner question about that I've been working on is how. And maybe that's not the question, maybe that's, go ahead.
And when you say they belong together, like they belong together in your life, in your day-to-day, in your, where do they belong together?
They belong together in the expression of my life's work. So, and perhaps it's kind of the box in my head that keeps them, that gets me into these thoughts about, well, how do they go together? And how are they related? And what do I do with that? So that's kind of the outer edge of like me seeing what's coming down, what's going to emerge maybe 10 years from now, and not really being able to see it, but just feeling into, okay, here's this I guess the two different frameworks would kind of be like the human design and the energy work, and all of that is sort of like the inner work, the work that I do with myself and with other people, that's sort of the internal work. And then the other, the growing and the relationship with the earth and all of that is sort of the the outer work of, you know, of my life's work, the outer expression. So I've been in this place of just exploring the two and looking for little clues about how one relates to the other, and in a relevant way, because there are ways that, like, there are certain designs for plants and insects and mammals and things like that, which I'm aware of just through my own studies, but it doesn't really seem to be relevant enough to actually connect that little bit of understanding that I have with how do you grow a tree? How does it bear, you know, how do I take care for my trees so that they bear the best fruit? And then on the other side, there's the under knowing that, you know, caring for trees on the very mundane level, or caring for whatever it is that I'm growing on a mundane level so that it bears the best fruit and grows the best, and is at its best and makes its best contribution to others, is also integrally related to this other work that I do. So one informs the other, or they inform each other, but I haven't yet seen the relevant connection between the two where it's like, oh, you know, doing human design in the orchard, or you know, I don't know how, I just don't know what that looks like. So,
and I'm curious because you've used this term, your life's work, a few times. And like, for me, I'm curious, what does that mean to you? Like, what is your life's work?
That's a good question. My life's work is what I feel that I want to have contributed and accomplished upon the earth at the time that I take my last breath. What is the culmination of what I've experienced, what I've contributed, the lives I've touched, the way I've touched them, and the change that I feel that I'm here to bring. So it's like a whole package of the contributions that I've made. So if I look at, like, you know, the end of life visioning, it's kind of like my touch point for, okay, here are all these pieces of things that I'm interested in, things that I find meaningful, and you know, and all of those things will be a culmination, or my experiences using them or working with them to affect other people in a positive way, will be the culmination of my contribution on the planet when I leave this body. So that's my life's work.
And the way you talk about it, it sounds like your life's work is kind of one thing.
I don't know that it has to be, but it feels like, at least for my mind, it feels like I need to kind of, or maybe I want to kind of see it as one big bundle of things. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's more about that they don't have to have the whole thing. I think my connection is unstable. Okay.
What I got was, you'd want to look at it as one bundle, and maybe it doesn't have to be one bundle, but one bundle. But I don't know if that's what you said.
Yeah, and you just froze up a little bit there, so I only got a little bit of that. So
we're
I
freezing
think,
up one after the other, huh?
yeah. So
Let's give it a second, maybe.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. All right. So, well, it says your bandwidth is
The last thing
low.
I got was this idea of
Are you there? It says your
I
bandwidth
do
is low.
hear. It doesn't tell me that.
Oh, now, yeah. And the screen went small and then it went big.
Otherwise, we could potentially try to go to audio, but that would be a bit sad.
Yeah. Okay, let me try one more time. So I don't think it needs to be a big bundle as I'm talking about it. I think that, and I'm wondering if maybe what I'm looking for there in terms of my life's work is how all of these little bundles may affect people. So the bundle may be the people that have been affected and changed by whatever tool or technique or focus that we were engaged in together.
And when you say they are changed, what's in your ideal vision of your life's work and of all the people you have touched and changed and impacted? Like, how have they changed in your ideal version?
They've become in some ways more courageous, more loving of themselves and others. Maybe they've made shifts out of their own mental restrictions, their own perceptions into something that's broader, into an understanding of, or an understanding or a perception around whatever it is that we were working with in a broader way, in a more open way, and that they've somehow been inspired to make their own contribution to others in a more powerful way, in a more meaningful way.
So it sounds like your hope for your own contribution is that people feel more free, more courageous to be themselves and impact others.
Yeah, to be themselves and impact others. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I'm curious, like, how do you see maybe your human design reading work and your orchard in that? Like, are they connected in that?
Well, I think that's the question that I started with. So let me feel into that for just a minute here. The human design work makes its contribution by showing people their potentials, showing them, bringing them to a place where, they understand and accept their own true nature. And then like the orchard work and whatever goes with that is kind of like the example of, what true nature is all about. Literally, what true nature is all about. How does nature behave, and what does it have to, how can it inform us as humans about our about going about being and expressing our true nature. So maybe that's the connection right there that I was looking for.
Is that how it is for you? That it teaches you that?
It does. It does. It teaches me. There are lots of truths that my orchard teaches me about life, and the maintenance of life and life force. Um, and it's in the mundane nuts and bolts of it, of fertilization and pruning and all of those things, waiting for the right time to pick fruit, patience, all of those things.
Yeah, I just had this thought of it. It teaches you all that, and if you don't abide by it, it doesn't judge you. It just shows you the result of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like, how is this for you? Because this feels quite round for me as well. I don't
It
know how.
does. It feels complete.
Hmm.
Where are we on the time?
15 minutes. Pretty much
Perfect.
on the dot.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. It actually sounds like a very um, interesting exploration. Like to me, I can see the connection, and I'm not sure I need an explanation for it. But I'm fascinated that you ask the how are these connected?
Yeah, well, I can see the connection too, but I don't know how to translate that into like the nuts and bolts real life thing. Like the offer, in terms of business, and maybe it doesn't have to be like that. So, um, I don't know. It's an interesting thing because they seem so disparate to me, and they're actually really kind of the same thing on different planes of understanding.
Mhm. Yeah, so thank you very much for this first half of our call.
Great. Thank you.
And I'll just give it a short second because my internet is slow right now.
Yeah, I see you stalling a little there in the screen.
Yeah.
So
So basically, um,
should I get my phone to set a timer, or
you
do you
you
want to
can.
set it?
No, I'm happy to do that. Like you
Okay.
don't have to worry about that. But you can
Okay.
basically ask me any questions that interest you, and I'm happy to answer.
Okay. Well, I think I want to start with just getting to know how you got led into the work that you're doing, because I know that it is, well, let me back up. I'd really like to know specifically how you describe or um, uh, how you describe the work that you do. And then the first question I want to do second. So,
Mm-hmm. That's one of the most difficult questions you can ask me. Um, so I have kind of two descriptions I'm toying with right now. One description that mostly applies to my session is that actually I think at the core what I'm doing with people is I'm listening. And I have a few tools that come from all sorts of places. that I think are interesting perspectives I can invite people in taking while I'm listening to them. But I think that the truest thing of what I do is I try to listen to people when they talk about what's bothering them, trying to really understand why whatever is bothering them might be in their life. Like, where is it coming from and what purpose does it serve? And I'm at the same time trying to listen to the place in them that's bigger than whatever problem they are facing. And I'm trying to support them that they can see their own problem from that bigger place, because my experience is usually then the problem transforms. So that's, I think, what I do when I talk to people one-on-one. And when I talk more about the groups, I've wrestled with this question for a long time, but I think, or what I'm coming to is I'm really trying to teach people things, and I'm trying to teach people very concrete and simple tools in how they can be with themselves, their parts and patterns, because we all have them, and we kind of have to learn how to be with them and other people in new ways. And I'm trying to really teach these tools, because I think we're often working with the kind of tools that we once learned that are long outdated, and we don't have a better option yet.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So there are two things that you do. There's the teaching the tools, and the listening. And I I've always known that both of them are for the purpose of helping people to transform. How did you come to the work that you're doing now?
So are you asking for the first start? Or
wherever you would like to start.
So the first start is actually pretty easy to pinpoint for me. There were 2 points where it kind of started. One was I was kind of like on a looking at studying and all of these things, and with everything I was thinking about studying that was practical, I always noticed that I don't understand humans. So how could I practice law if I don't understand humans? Like, how do I know what the right law is? And how do I know how the economy should be if I don't understand humans? So I always came up on this point of I don't understand humans, so gotta understand humans first. And then I started studying philosophy and psychology, which was a pretty dumb idea, but I started with that. And then during my studies, I had a really deep crisis, and all the knowledge I'd learned in my studies didn't help me at all, like zero. And what did help me was a form of meditation. And through that form of meditation, I had experiences that I didn't understand at all back then. Like, I had no understanding for what happened to me there. But what I would now call like an experience of oneness, not like, oh, I had a big enlightenment experience, but it was like something opened up, and after that my world was never the same. And I think since then I've been kind of trying to figure out what the fuck happened on that day. So I think that's kind of where it started.
So, okay, so you're trying to figure out what the fuck happened on that day. How does that relate to the work that you do with people?
I think the one thing that I really realized that day was that the big problems I had, like the huge crisis I was in, really had to do with the fact that this didn't exist beforehand. So after that, the crisis I was in didn't exist anymore. So I realized the potential for change. And I realized that the change I experienced in these few moments, because it really did change my life. And I could have never expected that. Like there was no framework in my mind for that.
Okay, so let me go back. When you say that you realized this didn't exist, can you explain that a little bit more to me?
Yeah.
I think I know, but I want to hear you explain it.
Yeah. So before that experience of, I call it oneness, whatever that means to people who are listening or to you, before I had that experience, this was all there was. And there was a problem in this. And that really, really fucked with me. Like, because there was this trouble, that was a deep crisis. But after this happened, this was still there, but it wasn't a real problem anymore. So really, this problem that had bothered me for weeks, where I was in kind of like I think as close to a depression. I'm not sure if I would call it a depression according to like clinical standards, but like being really low and having doubts about everything and about myself and being in self-loathing and all of that. That just changed because suddenly there was something bigger that I never knew existed beforehand. So that transformation opened me up to the potential of what it could mean to be human. Because as long as I was in, this is science, this is how things work, this didn't exist.
Yeah, thanks. That makes it a lot clearer. So, and that leads me to wonder how you bring that into your work with people.
So when I work with people, for me, that understanding, and this was something that was then at the core of my exploration for years, also in a way that I don't think was very healthy necessarily at all times, because I was chasing enlightenment and I was chasing these peak states, because that was a peak experience and I wanted that again, which was not always the most integrative thing I could have done.
Yeah.
But that's a different story. But through these experiences and through these years, I have a real understanding that that exists in every moment. And any moment there is that. We may not always have access to it, and it may be that there is this vastness or the space or our true being, and there are problems. It's not an either or, they both exist. And I used to try to get to the good place without the problems. But it's this understanding of, once people can access that place and that self or being, that usually the way they can interact with their problems and the parts that are creating problems in their life fundamentally changes. And I couldn't know that or trust in that without this first experience. There have been many experiences since, but that's what opened my eye to anything remotely in the realm of spirit or space, or however you want to call it.
So you know this, you carry this into your work, and I'm still just a little bit unclear. Is your aim to get everyone that you work with to that place of knowing of knowing that this doesn't exist, and they can be in the peak and in their problem at the same time?
So in my words, I would like to support people to realize that this does exist, like that the bigger place does exist. I'm not trying to get people into necessarily peak experiences. For me, I think for some parts of my life and developmental steps I've made, it was necessary to bring myself into peak states and into these like intentions where I would be meditating 12 or 16 hours a day and stuff like that, because that was the only way I could access these experiences. But actually what I'm much more drawn to nowadays is the opposite of a peak experience, like the fact that actually the self is normal and it's always there, and it may not always be the shiniest object that attracts our attention, but it's always there. Mm-hmm. And in one-on-one sessions, and in my courses on one level, I do try to always include this, but I don't try to push people to have a certain experience or a certain specific experience. In my experience, whenever something in us lets go, even if it's just a little bit, there's always naturally also space and also self. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is often a necessary step in healing. But I'm not fully sure on that. I want to talk about that actually in the next part, but I'm happy for your questions if you have more.
Where are we on the time there?
We have 2 more minutes.
Okay. Well, I guess I still want to just explore a little bit more about, okay, I guess I have an observation, and then I want to ask you if you have something to add to that, because because what I'm seeing as you're talking and as you're explaining how it is that you do what you do and what your background is, it seems as though your experience of this out here is actually what is the catalyst or the transformational presence for others. And I'm wondering if you see that as well, like you just show up with this presence of having that experience in someone else's field or in their presence. And I'm wondering if you see it that way, or if it's something a little bit different for you.
So you mean that the fact that I have access to this, at least on most days, not always, is part of the healing or part of the thing I can offer?
Yeah, through your, just by showing up.
I do think that is an important part, and I do think there are people I work with who I think have very, very little access to kind of these states, and I think often for them it can already be. I'm not a big fan of the word healing, but sometimes pleasurable, sometimes just relaxing, sometimes relieving to be with somebody who doesn't judge them, or with somebody who doesn't, who genuinely accepts and loves them in one way. That doesn't. So I do think that is a factor. But on the other hand, I think the actual much more profound factor is if somebody through this finds that in themselves. And I actually find I am personally much more drawn to people finding that in themselves rather than kind of putting it on me or on somebody else. And I think there are people who have much deeper access to space or self than me. Like, I don't actually think I'm like the enlightened person or something like that. But I find it oftentimes sad when I see people putting kind of all their hope and all the experiences they make with somebody. So if I have a great experience when I'm with you and I put all of that on you because it's your presence and it's your da da da, I find that much more sad than I find it beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah. This is good. I'm enjoying this.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I'm enjoying it too, just thinking about these things through these different perspectives and looking at, because for instance, this question and it seemed like that was something you were really getting to, this presence and how that impacts sessions and my work. It's something I don't think about very often because I just kind of take it for granted how I show up. And of course, I know there are days where I'm in a shit state. I think we all have them. And I notice this session went different. Like, I do have those days, but for me, this is not at the core of what I'm trying to give people. It's much more their own experience. So that's where I put much more of my thinking focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet your presence is there and undeniable.
Yeah.
But yeah, put it back so that they can use that as inspiration.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have 15 minutes too now.
Okay.
And actually, one of the thing I wanted to talk about is really close to one of the questions you asked, because you asked the question whether this experience of, and when I extend my arms, I mean, like I refer to space or self, or whether that's necessary. And that's a real question I have, and it's a duality in me that I keep on going to, which is that I have kind of two loves in my life, like, and also in my how I like working with people. And one of them is doing incredibly like deep and subtle explorations where it's often about people reconnecting with their self and from that connecting with problems or problematic patterns and paths in their life. And that's often deep, and transformation in that happens usually through this internal shift where they suddenly relate to themselves and their paths differently. And for that, in my experience, there is a necessity for space and self to be there. But I have this other thing I love, which is I also really love just making things like working really practically and working with really simple steps where it's not about, no, you don't have to like look at your problems at their core, and you don't always have to explore like, oh, where is this coming from, and trying to get to the bottom of things and looking at their causes. But sometimes it's just like building new muscle memory, and that might actually be everything that you need. And this new muscle memory can then actually invite new being into your day-to-day life. But yeah, for me, I keep on ping-ponging between those two, and I keep on saying, oh, this is more important, oh no, this is more important, and I want to focus on this, but what about this? And like, yeah, so that's a thing I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
Does that question make sense to you?
It makes sense, and yeah. Do you want to continue with that? Do you want to continue to explore
yes,
that?
like, and I'm happy for you to ask questions if you have questions, or if you.
Well, the question that I was thinking, and it was actually pretty much the question you were asking, is, how do you reconcile the two of those?
That's a really good question. And so I get to these places of even like, it's a real brain fuck for me, because in an ideal world, and in an ideal world, I would be like, anybody who works with me does both. And then I look at myself. In German we say, touch your own nose first, like, which is like, oh, this guy. And if I look at my life and my day-to-day life, and I'm like, how much time do I have available for my transformational practices and for my own inner work? And I'm like, I don't have all the time in the world. So usually when I work on something, it's good to focus on one thing. The idea of, oh, everybody should just do all of it is completely outrageous and ridiculously unrealistic. So so that goes out of the window. And then I'm like, oh, so they should start with the practical steps, because then when they get to the deeper work, then they already have that. But then I realized, oh, but for the practical step, it would be really, really beneficial if they knew the deeper work. So maybe and I keep on readjusting importance and readjusting steps. And what I'm starting to come to is just like, let people choose. Maybe I don't know the answer for them. Maybe they're drawn to one of them, and I offer both, and I see what people like. And maybe person A is all about like exploring their deeper patterns, and person B is like, fuck that, I just want to change my day-to-day life. And so maybe that's actually the solution. But in my brain really wants to figure out which one is more effective, and does it need both, and so
Yeah. So what's the trend with your clients? What are you seeing? Is there a particular client that favors one over the other, or are the majority of your clients favoring one over the other to start?
it's really different. It totally depends on the person, and it's oftentimes I oftentimes have people coming for the deep work, and after 3 sessions we realize that what will actually help them is just taking really simple practical steps, and the other way around. And for me, it's much less important with the one-on-one clients, because I can adjust, but it's much more important for the group work. And it's actually, I'm thankful already having talked to you about this, because in talking to you, I realized like I'm trying to control people's experience and people's life. If I'm telling them you have to do it in this order, so I should just, I can sometimes be a bit controlling. I imagine that's not such a good idea, and I should just let people choose. That's step number 1. Uh, and yeah, it actually, that thought really frees me to just say I shouldn't control people's lives and experience.
Yeah. So how does that work in a group situation? Where, I imagine like a lot of groups, there's some kind of structure to it. How would that work to let them choose? What do you see happening
Oh,
there?
it would have to be two different groups. One group that's
Okay.
about inner work and one group that's about the practical stuff. But
So what happens if like someone starts in the deep inner work group and then realizes that they need the practical, or vice versa?
yeah,
What do
that's
you
a
do
good
there?
question. I will have to. so and this may be very, very revealing of my patterns, because I immediately had this image of maybe I will have to yell at them, and then I was like, why would I yell at them? But but that's neither here nor there. But I, like, those are practical questions. I think I would figure that out.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm much more fascinated right now by the discovery of I don't have to choose for people. Like
Yeah.
I don't have to choose for them. It's up to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said that it was that kind of frees you up. Um, and I'm wondering how that freedom is going to shift the way you approach these two aspects of your work going forward.
The freedom, in one sense, I actually experience as then I'm just free to do both, um, because I don't have to decide which one is right and which one is wrong. Oh God, I'm listening to myself. I hear my controlling pattern. And I'm just realizing that that was what was going on. I was trying to like tell life how it should be correctly, which usually doesn't work very well. um, uh, but it basically just then tells me, this is another one I've been wrestling with in myself and in my work, is that um, I always have this idea of having to be an expert. And the point I come to is to actually admit to myself that I am not an expert. I'm not, maybe this is my human design, but I don't feel driven to be an expert in one thing, but I'm much more drawn to being a generalist who's pretty good at 10 different things rather than expertly at one.
Hmm.
So, and this frees me up for that. It's this sense of, I love working with people on really practical steps that they can take to actually kind of start cultivating new ways of being in the world from the bottom up. But I also really love diving deep with people and uncovering new being and birthing that through psychological work. And I actually don't have to cut off one of the two, but I can do both and just,
Hmm.
yeah, just invite people to both and see if people even want to do either of them with me, because who knows that? Like, but
Mm.
that's the freedom in me, uh, when I realize I don't have to choose.
Yeah, I can actually see that in your eyes, like you kind of lightened up when you realized that.
Yeah, it's a real relief. Like, and I can imagine that this sounds almost silly, that this was really bothering me, this thought, but it was, yeah,
No, and as you're talking, I'm making connections for myself in that regard as well. So yeah,
yeah.
it's very
But it's
interesting.
really this sense of, if I don't have to choose, then whatever wants to happen can happen, and then people are free. And that's actually a really deep value to me, is um, yeah, is people being able to choose freely. to follow what's right for them. And then it's not me telling them, but you have to do it in this order. First comes this, and second, you have to do this. And because I hate people telling me that. People tell me you have to do it in these 4 steps. But I'm like, nope, not gonna do it. I'm gonna start with 4, and then I do 2, then 1, and then 3.
I think that's in your design.
That might be, I don't know, but
that's awesome.
yeah.
Where are we on time? Anything else you want to?
We would still have time, but to me this feels really, again, very complete actually as a circle, and
you never know what's around the next corner.